Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started in the interest of time. I know people are still joining. But again, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us this evening for the next series in our career development webinar for NorCal Gastro. I'm going to go over some introductory slides. So objectives of today's webinar panel. On completion of the webinar, a few objectives we put together because this is CME accredited. We want to understand the different career options in industry, public health, health policy, and healthcare consulting after your clinical training. Understand the journey one takes transitioning from clinical training to a career in industry, public health, health policy, or healthcare consulting. And then understand the pros and cons of different career options in industry, public health, health policy, and healthcare consulting versus a purely clinical career. We have an excellent and amazing panel that's going to make for a very interesting discussion today. Just some housekeeping rules here. I know we're all zoomed out, so most of you probably know how to work Zoom, but please mute yourself because we do have a group here. We prefer to keep it a little bit more organized. So if you have questions, to use the chat box to ask your questions during and at the end of the presentation. If you'd like, especially for those that are getting CME and for the fellows, please enable your video, and that'll help Danny keep track of everyone. As I said, to ask a question, please use the chat function, and note that especially if you're asking to everyone, everyone can view everything that you're saying. Please update your username, and that'll help our organizers keep track of CME credit as well as the fellows for reimbursement for meals. As I mentioned, this is CME accredited. All of you should have received the email regarding a pretest. After the seminar, you will receive an evaluation form and a post-test from our organizers, and that will be followed by your CME certificate. This is the pretest link. For those that did not complete it or can't find the email, you can scan the image down here and complete the quick pretest, which will be needed to claim CME credit after the seminar is complete. And again, there's an online evaluation form, and you should receive all of this information via email after completion of the event. For fellows in particular, so we were lucky enough to get funding. So all GI hepatology fellows that are participating do receive a meal credit for dinner during the seminar. So these are the instructions that I'm sure you have seen, but make sure you sign up to be a member. Membership is free for all trainees. And then you simply order your meal and then coordinate with Danny to get your $30 credit for dinner. Oh, and I think remember to keep your name and video so we can sort of track attendance for this. And we thank our sponsors for sponsoring the CME for the entire series. Today we have a great panel, and the focus is on exploring career options in different industry, public health, and health policy. And Bianca Chandra will introduce our panel in a bit. But as a little bit of a teaser, we have upcoming webinars throughout the rest of the year. This will include a very interesting discussion about complex and interesting IBD cases by Uma Mahadevan from UCSF. We're going to have a talk in March about burnout and wellness in medicine. In May, in April, we'll have a talk on complex cases and hot topics in motility by Linda Nguyen at Stanford. In May, Walter Park's going to give us some updates about approach to diagnosis and management of pancreatic lesions. And then in June, we're still looking for a speaker, but it's going to be focused on updates on vascular disease, management of vascular diseases of the liver. And just a little plug, I know there's a lot of conferences going on, but our society is also organizing a liver symposium. And this year, the symposium is every Thursday during the month of January. If you're interested and have not registered, you can check it out on our website and register to attend those as well. We want to thank our committee members, especially our fellows, Bianca, Liat, Jessica, Tim, Mike, and Stephanie, who are the fellow members of our Training and Education Committee, who have really worked tirelessly to put together the events that make up this session. And then the chairs of the committee, Bilal, Radhika, and myself helped organize this. And with that, I'm going to unshare my screen, and then I'm going to turn it over to Bianca Chandra, who's a third-year fellow, GI fellow at CPMC, who will take over and moderate the rest of the session. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. I'm Bianca. Thank you so much for attending, and a special thanks to all our esteemed panelists who come from a wide array of backgrounds, and though not necessarily perhaps following the traditional career pathway for a clinician, are all making really interesting and impactful contributions to medicine. So I'll be introducing them each one by one, and then we can hear about their career journey, hear about how they got to their current position, what the pros and cons are they feel of alternative career pathways versus becoming a clinician, pure clinician, or going into academic medicine. So to begin, we will first meet Dr. Ahmed Chitnis, who has interests in applied public health, clinical medicine, and epidemiology of infectious diseases. And he has extensive experience at numerous institutions across the country. He is currently the tuberculosis controller and section director at Alameda County Public Health Department. He obtained an MPH at Columbia before receiving his medical degree at UC San Diego. And after finishing residency, he then completed an Epidemic Intelligence Service Fellowship at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Dr. Chitnis.
Yeah, no, thanks for the introduction. And, I think, I wanted to just provide a little more background after that. So after, sort of finishing residency, I was the pandemic flu medical officer in Wisconsin. And that's really, I think, when my sort of applied public health career sort of started. This is about, almost 10 years ago, and it was in Wisconsin, and I was in charge of influenza surveillance for hospitalized patients, and also investigation of outbreaks in healthcare settings. And there I was really lucky to work with a really, sort of great epidemiologist, Jeff Davis, and I was able to work on surveillance of influenza. We submitted our findings, published them, really try to drive prevention, and worked on an outbreak of Legionella in a hospital. After that, I did go to, CDC and finish my fellowship, primarily in healthcare infections. And since then have been really working in tuberculosis and in public health, minus 2 years I was at Genentech. But I think the way I've got to where I am right now is really, I think my background and interest was always sort of in epidemiology, public health, and then it sort of cemented, desire to want to go in public health after working as the flu medical officer in Wisconsin. I think what I'm currently doing is, what I enjoy about it is I'm currently responsible for TB prevention and control in Alameda County. We still have a fair amount of TB in the US and in certain high burden counties. And I really get to think deeply about clinical cases, ones that are challenging for clinicians, and help provide guidance. And at the same time, also see patients at Highland. And then I do get to focus and think about sort of applied epidemiologic studies and trying to guide sort of prevention activities, with use of analysis of Alameda County data and national data. So currently what I do is really a mixture of oversight of public health management of TB. Most of what I've been doing since January has been COVID. And what I'm doing in COVID is, in addition to TB, is responsible for the oversight and management of COVID outbreaks in our correctional facilities. I think some unique features I think about my sort of current position, I think that I truly enjoy is that it is a blend of, I think, medicine and public health. Thinking about epidemiology, there's active sort of involvement on really challenging, complex TB cases. And I think I get to work with a multidisciplinary team of nurses, epidemiologists, healthcare policy folks in our health department. I think in terms of sort of pros and cons that I would have for someone considering position in public health is really whether or not you enjoy delving deeply into sort of problems, working with multidisciplinary teams, and really if you have the patience to challenge and tackle a problem that might take many years to sort of get incremental gain. I think my tips, if you're thinking about a career in public health, is just from my background. I think it was a tremendous experience for me to work at the CDC and complete my fellowship there, and I think that helped train me to think in a systematic way for public health problems. So I would say anyone considering a career in public health as a physician, definitely do consider the Academic Intelligence Service Fellowship. So that's it.
Great. Thank you so much for
Thank
sharing your experience. I'm going to remind everyone that the chat's open for any questions, and we'll be getting to those at the end. But we'll next meet Dr. Reese Isaacson. He is a senior life sciences consultant at LEK Consulting, where he has experience leading teams in a wide variety of project types and sectors in various therapeutic areas, such as oncology, neuroscience, ophthalmology, and inflammation. He obtained his medical degree from USC Keck School of Medicine, followed by residency at LA County USC. He then obtained an MBA at Yale School of Management before becoming a consultant. Welcome.
Thank you, Bianca. And what Bianca doesn't mention is that I think I was a year ahead of her for all of med school and residency. So go Keck, I guess. I should also mention that as of yesterday morning, I'm no longer at LEK. My new title is Associate Director of Corporate Strategy at 4D Molecular Therapeutics. So happy if anyone cares to talk about my day and a half of experience so far there, but I'll, I guess, limited to how I ended up where I am. So like Bianca said, went to med school at USC, did my residency in internal medicine there as well. Kind of took a random path. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I actually initially applied radiology and decided in February that I didn't want to do radiology anymore. So I talked to our program director who let me stay on at Keck without having to go through the whole application process again. I realized I didn't want to see myself in a dark room for the rest of my life. And then practicing medicine during residency, I realized I didn't see myself being a practicing internist the rest of my life. Maybe that'll change, but that was my assessment at the time. What I kind of felt like to me was what was really determining patient outcomes wasn't as much what I was doing, but more so the tools I had at my disposal. For instance, in my first year, PD-L1s weren't really a thing, and now they're given out like candy to anybody with oncology or with a solid tumor. And I feel like to really have the impact I wanted to have, just wanted to take a step back, work in the broader life sciences space, use the MBA as my leverage point, which pros and cons there, and then from there transition to consulting, which I think of like a residency in the business world, and I think that is true in a lot of senses. Most people don't stay that long. I think 2 to 3 years is a pretty common time period in consulting before leaving. It's built on an up or out model, very much like law firms or accounting firms, where you progress through the ranks or you leave, and most people do end up leaving. Let's see. It was a really good experience in terms of actually learning and getting the ins and outs of the industry. Like Bianca said, I think I did 25-ish cases, got exposure to a whole bunch of really interesting, unique strategy type projects. I worked with leading players in the life sciences space, big top 5 biopharma, all the way to preclinical biotechs, help them to solve really mission critical strategy questions. Things like should they acquire another company? Where should they trial their assets? What is the opportunity for their asset in a certain area? These are questions that companies spend a lot of time and money thinking about, and being able to go in there and help them think through those questions was incredibly fun, incredibly rewarding, and also really challenging. Yeah, really good experience overall. Like I said, business residency, so to speak. Let's see, what else am I supposed to talk about? Pros and cons of consulting. Like I said, it's a really great learning experience. I think if you want to stay in for 2 years and leave, it's depending on the firm you go to, it's a really great educational opportunity and a great resume stamp. And then if you do end up staying long term, just from a monetary perspective, it can be incredibly lucrative. Negatives, I would say I probably work similar hours to my residency, which is not always fun to do, especially once you're done with residency. It's differently structured, but definitely long hours. I think especially coming from the world of medicine, where the physician, I mean, being a resident's hard, but ultimately there's a lot of power being a physician, so to speak. Going to a corporate hierarchy was, I think, it is a transition, I think, regardless of where you go. And I think consulting is pretty rigidly hierarchical. Yeah. Any tips I have to people, I think really is just follow your passion. If you want to practice medicine. If you don't, figure out the best way to leverage your degree and experience and exposure to figure out what you want to do and give it a good thought. I know for me, the medicine path kind of feels like a river that you were in. It's really easy to go from step A to step B to step C and end up practicing at Kaiser for 30 years. And if you want to do that, that's great. That's fantastic. It's a really great career. But just give it a good think. So I'm happy to answer questions anybody has. So.
Great, thanks, Reese, and congratulations on your new position. Well, then I would like to introduce Dr. Jeremy Zokov. He is head of clinical pharmacology and experimental medicine at GlaxoSmithKline, where his group works to translate new biological insights into clinical therapies. Previously, he led a translational immunology team at AbbVie and also was an assistant professor of medicine at Stanford, where he led an NIH VA-funded research translational immunology lab. He received his medical degree from Boston University, where he also served as resident and chief resident, and then completed a rheumatology fellowship and postdoctoral training at Stanford. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thanks, Bianca. And yeah, so obviously I know Bianca from her time at Stanford as well. So she got me through my postdoctoral fellowship. Thank you. So yeah, so I think I had the opposite problem that Reed had, which is I kind of liked everything I did. So I started out in clinical medicine, and I just assumed I was going to be a clinician, and I enjoyed that. And but my route was a little strange. I actually ended up in the military because the military paid for my residency. Paid for my medical school. So I split my residency between military time and residency. And then after residency, I went back into the military after my chief residency. I went back in the military as an internist, and I liked being an internist. But I also knew that I wanted to get more back into academics and research. So I went and did a rheumatology fellowship, which is a field I was always interested in, and had a lot of research opportunity on the other end. And so I did a research postdoc. So, you know, some people fast track, I slow tracked, and ended up with a postdoc in my 30s. And that was really a lot of fun. And it launched me into a junior faculty position at Stanford, which is kind of what I was shooting for 15 years. And, you know, as I kind of made my way through academic medicine, which I'm sure a lot of you are probably considering, academics, it has a whole lot of really great opportunities. There's, you know, if you do it right, there's the opportunity to kind of sail your own ship in your own direction. But at the end of the day, you're always dependent on both the the government funding situation, as well as the politics of academics to kind of lead you to get you where you need to go. And you have to develop, as one of my mentors said, Teflon. Heat shields, other people have called them, and you just got to put them up because you're gonna get it from all different angles. Every time you publish a paper, someone who thinks that someone who's having a bad day is going to tell you why it isn't good. When you apply for grants, people are incentivized to tell you why it's not a good grant because there just isn't enough money to go around. And some people are very, very good at kind of pushing through that and saying, this is just the game. I'm going to play the game. And other people say, I don't want to play the game. I want to do science. And I was kind of getting to that point in my academic career where I was like, I'm spending so much time changing my trajectory and my science based around what other people are saying to get money and get forward momentum that I really felt like there had to be a better way. And people always talked about the dark side, which is industry, and industry, that's not good science. And I got involved with a lot of consulting for industry, which was great. So I did a lot of work in my lab for in my mentor's lab, then in my lab for different companies. And it actually, to be completely honest, industry science is the most clean science that's done, in my opinion. And the reason I said that was because they wanted you to prove things weren't true so they could stop them and not waste their money. Whereas in academics, even once you've decided it probably wasn't true, you still had to finish the project to get it published, or there was no more money in the future. So there was a lot of milking of science in academics, and in industry, it was pure. It was cutthroat on the science. Is the science real? Yes, no. If not, move on. And I like that. And so I had the opportunity to start a couple of companies. Most of them weren't successful, but one of them was. And I spent a lot of time working with that company. And then when I finally realized I was better off, my lab was doing about half industry, half academic work, and NIH VA work. And I said, I really just like the other part better. It was much more human related. It was much more scientifically rigorous, in my opinion. I didn't have to, I just gave data, the right data, and people were appreciative of having the truth. And so I made the decision to move to industry, and I got offered a role. Obviously, I could have gone to the company I started, but I got offered a role at a larger pharma. And if someone said, you're better off going to large pharma. And the reason for that is because you'll just get so much more experience across the matrix. So I went to AbbVie, and they kind of, a warning, industry people, when you're good, will tell you things to get you there. And one of the things they said was, you'll have an opportunity to build a great translational science group. That's why we're hiring you. And when I showed up, they looked at me and said, MD. MD in medicine stands for, in pharma stands for medical director. And so I got thrown on a bunch of phase 3 studies that had to get done. And I was like, this isn't really what I signed up for, but I'm getting paid pretty well and I'm here. So it actually turned out to be great. The key thing about industry that I learned is the more and the wider range of experiences you get, the more able you are to climb the career ladder in industry. Because the key thing about being a leader in industry is really being able to understand the full spectrum of what it takes to get a drug from concept to the clinic and beyond. And so again, I eventually got to build my translational science group. I had to run a whole lot of studies in the process, and the more studies I ran, the more they gave me, and the more I ran, the more they gave me, the more I ran, and it really set me up really nicely. So that within 5 years or so, I had experience in early development, late development, got commercial experience, medical affairs experience, and really was able to kind of get that spectrum of experience, which propelled me into my new role. And so I've been now, actually not that new, it's been about 1.5 years. I've been at GlaxoSmithKline, and I was hired to run a very large group, relatively large group. So I'd never had more than about 6 or 7 people under me, even in my academic lab or in my role, in my prior role. And they said, well, you can grow into it. And one of the things that my boss who hired me said, I think we were able to take a chance. You have the scientific background, and when you're in the military, how many people were under you? And I said, 75, 80. And he said, what's the difference? I said, okay. And so again, things that you don't think in your past will come back to be valuable. He probably wouldn't have hired me if he hadn't seen that experience with leadership. So I think everything kind of comes back at you. So I think that the advice I'd give is get as much experience as you can, and the saying that anything doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and it will make you stronger and more valuable to whatever organization you end up in, because the ability to apply different learnings and things to that question. What do I do now? Now I have kind of what I would have described previously my dream job, which is I have the opportunity to reach back into what we call the research units, basic science units, picking targets, new targets. So we're in IBD, and what's the next drug for IBD? And not just what's the next drug, but why? And what's different about this target? And how is its trajectory to a medicine, going to be executed? And it takes a crystal ball for 7-8 years in the future, but that's the fun of it. And so you get to do the science, plan the clinical, execute the clinical, and hopefully some of them become medicines. The probability is not good, 10 to 20% if you're lucky. And but if you do enough of them, you'll hopefully get there and be able to find part of some of the science that you had a contribution to becoming a medicine for somebody. And so my group, that's what we do. We translate the science to early development in medicine through proof of concept, and then we hand it off to late development to run the registrational trials, which again is the ultimate decision maker of if a drug gets approved. But I think that the fun part is does your horse run fast enough to be competitive, and that's determined well before the Kentucky Derby. So I think it's the fun part of the game. So that's what I do, and it was a circuitous route. Everything was probably unplanned, but just follow your interests, and don't be afraid to reinvent yourself periodically. You'll probably end up happier if you do that.
Great. Thank you, Jeremy, for sharing your story with us. Next, I want to introduce Dr. Michael Rothenberg, who is Senior Medical Director at Genentech, where he leads teams that are working on translating basic science discoveries into patient benefit across multiple therapeutic areas, including inflammatory disease, immunology, and neuroscience. He obtained his medical degree and PhD at UCSF, then completed residency, GI fellowship, and postdoctoral research training at Stanford, where he continues to serve as an adjunct professor. Welcome, Dr. Rothenberg. You are muted. Let's see if we can take care of that.
There we go. Okay, great. It wouldn't let me, the host wouldn't let me unmute myself, but now I've been allowed to speak. I feel like I'm at home. Just kidding. So I'm Mike Rothenberg. Jeremy, I really, a lot of what you said just resonated with me. I think we have a lot in common. So I did an MD PhD at UCSF after figuring out early on that I was really interested in both basic research and discovery as well as clinical medicine. And I went through that program fully intending to be a physician scientist on an academic trajectory, having a lab, seeing patients, and ideally studying a disease or a group of diseases that would sort of cross over from the clinic to the lab and vice versa. So with that in mind, I completed that in 2005. I moved down from UCSF down to Stanford, where I did internal medicine residency, and then GI fellowship, hepatology fellowship, and then did on the research track, and then did a postdoc with the Stanford at the Stem Cell Institute, studying intestinal stem cell biology. And things were going quite well. I mean, I was publishing, I got a career development award, and was really excited about continuing on that track. And then kind of hit a point where I decided to do a national academic search, and thought hard about what I wanted to be when I grew up, even though at that point I was about 40, maybe 39, after all that training. And what I encountered was a lot of really talented, hardworking, passionate physician scientists in all the different institutions I visited, who were like crushed by this dual competing demands between clinical medicine, which was getting more and more difficult to do, as well as science, which was also becoming increasingly competitive. And then, of course, there's all the other stuff outside of your job, having a family, having some degree of work-life balance. And so I started to wonder, like, how, and a lot of these people were pretty unhappy. But I started to wonder, you know, of course, I believed in myself. That's, you have to believe in yourself to take this path that you all are taking, really. And but I thought, geez, you know, how likely am I to be really different from these people that I'm meeting? And I also started thinking hard about what my research would eventually, how would I achieve that goal of really being a physician scientist rather than having like two separate jobs. So I started exploring other options at that point, or started to talk to people who had taken different tracks, and met a bunch of people at that time who had transitioned from a path very similar to mine over to pharma or biotech. A bunch of people happen to go to Genentech or some of the other big companies around here who do a lot of translational medicine and develop drugs. And so I started looking into that and got more and more intrigued, and eventually decided to just give up the KO8 and jump over to industry and join Genentech in 2015. And found that immediately a lot of the things that Jeremy mentioned, that the science was just at an incredibly high level. I mean, like day one, when I arrived at Genentech, I started talking to people who were interested in GI stem cells, who I already knew were world's experts in GI stem cells from before I got there, because they had published amazing work in that field. But like the stuff that they had done and hadn't yet published was just blew me away. And the rigor of that science and the impact that it could have. So I got really excited about that. And I'll tell you, I mean, the whole story about how I, like the different path I took within Genentech is a whole other story, but eventually ended up in the clinical science group in early clinical development, where we really work closely with our discovery scientists and to advance drugs that target novel pathways and so forth, and then develop them in phase 1 and phase 2 studies to just get that early proof of concept, to demonstrate safety, to demonstrate early activity or early efficacy. And then if a molecule looks successful, we would then pass that off to our late stage colleagues who would do the registrational trials. I do have you would at that point have the opportunity to go with that molecule if you were so inclined to get that late stage experience. But I decided that my passion is really in translational medicine, at that junction between science, bench to bedside and bedside back to bench. So the pros of my current role, I think, are the people. I think there's just a steady stream of absolutely amazing people I encounter every day. There's a diversity of projects that I'm involved in and have been involved in over the years, targeting different interesting diseases, different kinds of modalities, of therapeutic modalities, which all have their different kind of considerations. I've been fortunate to be involved in on lots of different teams, lots of different biomarker efforts, lots of different clinical trials, lots of different like health authority interactions with health authorities in different countries and different regions. Obviously, you get to travel to lots of meetings, you get to meet with lots of KOLs. And one thing that's been fun for me is that even though when I joined the company, I saw myself as a gastroenterologist. I mean, I specialized in GI, but at the same time, I had, come out of internal medicine. And so I was able to really step back and start thinking again as an internist and more broadly. So those are some of the pros. And I just think in general, it's fun. I mean, I've just had so much fun in this new job. Well, new, I mean, it's not even new now, but I feel like it is. I'm just like super excited about what I'm doing. And I mean, I guess the only cons or drawbacks I could think of is that I have basically given up clinical medicine. When I first switched over, I was still attending in fellows clinic, but I had decided to stop doing endoscopy. I figured, like, I wouldn't want to be really on either end of that endoscope. You know, I didn't want to be the patient getting the colonoscopy from the guy who did it once every month or two, and I wouldn't want to be the person doing it. So, so that, you know, that was kind of hard because endoscopy was like a lot of fun, the ultimate video game, and you really make a big difference, and you get to see the organ that you're really studying. But I got over that. My wife's a gastroenterologist, as is my father-in-law, so I live vicariously through them. Lots of colonoscopy talk around our dinner table, and so that's the main drawback. I mean, there's another drawback too, which is sort of the autonomy that you have. I mean, you always have control over your own career and your own career path, and we've heard a little bit about that tonight already. But on a specific project, you know, even if you're the team leader, there's going to be governance, there's going to be other stakeholders that you have to involve if you want to make a decision or take something in one direction or another. And that is challenging and kind of interesting to try to influence without authority and get people to come along with you. But it's you know, it's sometimes difficult. And sometimes if you're told top down, this is what we want you to do, sometimes you have to work with that. I haven't fortunately been in that kind of situation where I've disagreed with any decisions, but major decisions, but you know, that's a potential drawback in industry in general. So the only tips if I would have, if you decide, if you know you really want to go into industry and drug development, is it's really helpful to have clinical trial experience in some form or another. So whether that's like getting involved in a clinical trial as part of your research project, or really becoming familiar somehow with clinical trials, epidemiology, how to interpret, but also how to design and execute studies. So there, when I applied to Genentech, I had no real solid clinical trial experience, and you know, they called me out on that and said, "Well, how are you going to deal with that?" And I said, you know, I had an answer. I thought we certainly read lots of clinical trials and understood how to interpret the data and how the endpoints work, but you know, I really didn't know the details of clinical trials. So so that was that is one thing you could try to get involved in. I mean, Stanford is a place where there's lots of different kinds of clinical trials going on. If you have familiarity there, that'll help you. But you know, if you're interested and passionate, that'll come through. Everybody on this call is really bright, well accomplished, and you do well if you're happy and that's something you wanted to do. So, and thanks, Robert, for inviting me to this. It's an interesting forum.
Okay. Thanks, Dr. Rothenberg, for that great advice. I would next like to introduce Dr. Bora to everyone. He has extensive experience in clinical medicine, clinical research, and public health policy. He's a faculty member at UCSF Fresno Department of Emergency Medicine. He's also the medical director of Fresno Madero Division of the California Poison Control. And has served both in the US and internationally as a toxicology educator and researcher. Additionally, he is the interim health officer for the Fresno County Department of Public Health, where he has been at the forefront of the pandemic response in the San Joaquin Valley. He attended medical school at Baylor, followed by emergency medicine residency at UT Southwestern Parkland Hospital. And then he completed a toxicology fellowship at UC San Diego and California Poison Control System. Welcome, Dr. Bora.
Thank you so much, and thank all of you for spending the evening with this amazing panel. And you know, kudos to my co-panelists. I'm very impressed by everyone's stories and everyone's journeys, and I'm almost embarrassed about being here. I don't think I should be invited. I think you guys are much more impressive than me. I'm just an ER doctor, but that's really my background. I did my emergency medicine residency in Texas, actually, at UT Southwestern and Parkland Hospital. And then I was invited to, well, I applied and then I was accepted to a toxicology fellowship in San Diego. So I was at UCSD for a couple of years. And then after that, I took on a faculty position at UCLA and then actually relocated to Fresno. So that's where I am now. Fresno actually has one of the 4 poison control centers in California. And we actually cover all of LA and really all of the Central Valley from LA up to Stockton. So, you know, as a toxicologist, that was just a great opportunity for me. It's something that I've been doing for the last 10 years. And I really just thought of myself as just a thoroughbred academic. You know, the UCSF Fresno program is a level 1 trauma center. It's really a place that trains about 400 residents and fellows. And we're really just, you know, an academic medical center that happens to be a satellite of UCSF, but we're really the only academic medical center in the Central Valley. There's some other residency programs that are kind of cropping up here and there, but this place has been here for 40 years. So I really just thought of myself as this, you know, this academic clinician that was also just skilled in toxicology and doing my medical director work through the UCSF School of Pharmacy, which actually runs the poison control centers. But it turns out that that's really more of a public health position on top of the pure toxicology position. With poison control, which you may or may not be familiar with, they actually run a 24/7 hotline, and that is open to really everyone. You know, parents that may have an exposure because their child got into something, older folks, paramedics can call in, and certainly clinicians call in from emergency department or the wards or the ICU. So we see the whole spectrum from home all the way to the critical care areas, and we advise people about how to manage poisonings, overdoses, snake bites, even exotic things like, you know, spider bites and mushroom toxicity and things like that. I know this is a GI forum, so you know, we have really great conversations with our hepatology and our GI colleagues with you know, everything that runs the gamut from acetaminophen poisoning to you know, just strange supplements that are just causing liver toxicity to obviously some of the deadly mushrooms, et cetera. So it's a very interesting job. But beyond that, you know, it's really evident that we really should just be also in the business of prevention and really helping to prevent poisoning. So that was something that I took very seriously, and we really are very aggressive at trying to get really good messaging out to help people understand, you know, poisons can be everywhere, even within your home. And we really should help prevent poisonings as much as possible. And we do a lot of just development of materials and educational sort of programs, webinars. We're on social media. We create like a poisonous plants calendar every year that we kind of give out to area schools and stuff like that. And all of that was going relatively well. And then one day, about this time last year, actually, I was approached by my local public health department, and they said, well, you know, we'd love to have some help. And we were just wondering if you're interested in kind of moonlighting with us. And I said, sure, you know, that sounds pretty interesting. I thought it was going to be like kind of a side hustle. Maybe it would just get me out of 1 or 2 shifts in the emergency department, you know, that I would just be, get to know them. They obviously, as I said, you know, with my poison center job, I feel like I do quite a bit of public health through them, but this is the formal public health department. They have a lead poisoning prevention program. You know, they obviously do a lot of just preventative kind of messaging as well. So I said, sure, I guess I'll come over. I'll get to know you. You'll get to know me, et cetera. And, you know, around this time last year, remember January, we heard about this strange virus that was affecting cities in China. And you know, it was basically brewing overseas. We didn't know how serious it was going to be. And around that time, the person who hired me said, you know, I'm really thinking about retiring. So I'm just going to hand over the keys to you, and you can just take over. You can be the interim health officer. We'll get you swearing on the Constitution, and you'll be in charge of the county's vital statistics program. But I think you can handle it, and see you later. 2 weeks later, we get our first COVID patient in Fresno County. It was one of the cruise ship passengers. And you'll remember the cruise ships is where, you know, that's how it was coming over back in the early days. So we basically had to like do contact tracing. I didn't even know what contact tracing was. I was like doing contact tracing on these cruise ship passengers, trying to figure out where they live, how are they going to get their groceries, who are they going to interact with, and doing all of these interesting things. And
Okay.
Sorry. Sorry about that. That was literally a congressman. That's my life now. So I basically said I'd call him back. He's become like a good buddy of mine, but I'll talk about that in a minute. Anyway, so basically that's how it started. It was like, okay, now we have 2 cruise ship passengers. Now we have 6 cruise ship passengers. Then like we took the weekend off, and then we had to change the number of COVID cases from 6 to 12. And everybody had a fit. They were like, why didn't you update over the weekend? You doubled your case rate from 6 to 12. And we deserve to know whenever you double your case rate in the county from 6 to 12 cases. People just absolutely lost their mind. So this is where we were like in March, April of last year. And now we're up to 70,000 cases. Obviously, I don't want to make light of this pandemic, but that's kind of what my whole year has been is, you know, I took this on as kind of a part-time gig just to get to know them. And now it's basically just been full-time COVID all the time. And you know, I'm sure all of you have kind of lived through this pandemic also, and we're not talking about COVID, but here it is. It's already sneaking into this conversation. So basically, that's basically what I've been doing is I've been the interim health officer of Fresno County and just overseeing the pandemic response and just trying to stay on top of this very dynamic response that, you know, had to do a lot with diagnostic testing, obviously, helping to oversee some of the strategies, the therapeutic strategies, et cetera, that our hospitals were initiating at the time. And more recently, I guess the happier news is now that we have vaccines, I have the really fun but difficult job of trying to implement the vaccination program. So that's kind of what I'm spending most of my time doing these days, is just making sure that we have vaccination sites, vaccination allocations set up, really interacting with state as well as federal partners. So that was actually my national congressman. He calls me about once a week just to say, how's it going? What are you doing? Is there anything I can do to help you, et cetera? It's been quite an adventure. I don't have any formal training in this. And so I'm just trying to learn as best as I can. I think of myself as a very curious person, a very outgoing person. I think that that's kind of served me in this role. I think of myself as someone who tries to really understand a concept and then boil it down and try to explain it to the general public. So I've really taken on the role of doing messaging, you know, in a different way, but taking the same strategy as I did with my poison control position, which is really just getting the public good information so that they can make good decisions about how to stay safe during this time. You know, the cons really, because this pandemic is unrelenting, it's really hard to separate the actual position from just the intensity, I think, and the endurance test that it's putting us all through. But I think one of the cons of doing a public health position, and I know that Amit is also doing public health work, is that it ends up being strangely political. And this pandemic also, especially, has been more political than just about anything else in medicine. I mean, you know, no one will argue with Amit about what tuberculosis actually means and you know, whether it's real, what needs to be done about it, you know, et cetera. But these are the conversations that happen, you know, sometimes very unpleasant conversations that happen just because people are, they're very tired. There's just a very indignant faction in this country that is really working against, I think, public health and public safety. And at the same time, you know, we've made some missteps just about messaging related to how we could keep people safe, and really just giving people simple advice that they can abide by. You know, I think if we had more time to just kind of shop and workshop all of the different strategies that we have, we would certainly have done it better. But because we're having to pivot and move so quickly, that we basically are doing the best that we can. Like one example is today I had to do a press conference with like the board of supervisors, all the suits from the county, and we were out in front of our fairgrounds, which is where we're doing our vaccinations, and we're trying to get 1,500 vaccinations done per day. And basically they have a big poster and it says, you know, here's all the tiers. They've set up like who's the allocations. The first tier is like healthcare workers, people on the front lines of medicine. And then the tier after that is supposed to be the elderly, and like our poster said 75 and older, because that's what the state told us would be the second tier. But then like around 10 o'clock this morning, the White House and the CDC decided that it should actually be 65 and older. So then like our poster doesn't reflect what we're actually planning to do starting tomorrow. And it's like, what are we going to do? Change the poster now that we're at this press conference? I mean, it's just like things are moving so quickly that we just don't have time to sit and really just deliberate about them the way that we would say in academics before, you know, we make a move. And I think that that's part of that confusion that everyone is feeling. And that honestly leads to burnout and fatigue and indignation. And so I think all of us are feeling that, but I'm getting to witness it from the inside. So it's been quite a journey from that perspective. But you know, I say I feel like I'm on a magic carpet ride. I again don't know how I quite lucked into or unlucked into this position, but it sure has been an adventure. And I certainly hope that happier days are ahead, because we're in a very dark period when we're having just these huge surges. The hospitals are severely impacted. I feel like the vaccines represent the light at the end of the tunnel, but the tunnel is narrowing as we try to get through it. And unfortunately, that's where we are in healthcare today. So, you know, I do recommend public health really for anyone. At least spend a month with your local public health department. That's something that I didn't really have the opportunity to do as a resident, but it's something that I'm trying to help set up here just through our residency. Spend a month doing something with public health just so you understand what it is. I think it's going to change a lot, frankly, just with this pandemic. I think there's been a lot of lessons learned, and we're certainly hoping that the hollowing out and the eroding of public health, which has been happening for the last several decades, will actually start to reverse now, and that people will really give it the support that it needs. And at the same time, I really feel like a lot of the failures in medicine and a lot of the failures in civil government can be fixed if we just go upstream. And that's really, to me, the central philosophy of public health is to go upstream and really try to fix problems before they happen or before they get worse. And so it's kind of interesting that as an ER doctor, you know, I get to see the downstream effects of a lot of things. And now in my public health position, I really feel like I have the opportunity and the responsibility to kind of go upstream and help prevent a lot of these things before they actually become emergencies. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all for your great advice and for your sharing out your interesting work that you're doing. We have about 5 minutes left. So hopefully we can go over maybe a couple questions from the chat. And one was, I guess, directed more to Reese. Do you need an MBA or can you go into consulting without it? And then you mentioned not necessarily that there are programs specifically within consulting firms, such as McKinsey Insight MD and Bridge to BCG. Can you tell us a bit more about what kind of programs these are?
Yeah, so both of those are educational. Just taking a step back, no, you definitely do not need an MBA to go into consulting. There are healthcare and life sciences firms that will hire directly either PhDs or MDs and train them. The two biggest ones I think of are McKinsey and BCG. Those are some of the biggest, most prestigious consulting firms. McKinsey Insight and Bridge to BCG are sort of training-ish programs that's meant to introduce you over a period of a few days or a week to what consulting is like, act as sort of a get-to-know-you kind of thing. You certainly don't need to do them to apply to consulting, but they are just good ways to sort of introduce you. And if you go to their websites, they'll have all their sort of like application-type programs for advanced degree candidates. I know McKinsey has like 3, 4, 5 different ways that you can get involved as an MD candidate. They have, I think, like a fellowship program after or during med school where you spend 2 years there between the 3rd and 4th year. There are a couple other ways that you can sort of get to know them and sort of get to weigh the process of whether or not consulting is right for you. Long story short, no, definitely do not need an MBA. Not even sure it helps, but doesn't hurt. So yeah, don't need it. Pursue an MBA if you want it. Pursue consulting if you want to.
Okay. Another great question we got is, are there opportunities to continue staying clinically active, such as volunteering in clinics, especially those who are now in industry or consulting? But in general, are you finding that you're able to balance your clinical interests with your other responsibilities? And Dr. Rothenberg mentioned that there are local institutions like Stanford VA that do have such opportunities, but I was wondering if anybody else had any experience with this.
So I definitely, you know, I similar to, you know, Dr. Rothenberg was attending in the VA rheumatology clinic. I'd been in the VA, so I continued to attend there. And eventually I found that I was traveling more and more, and I wasn't reliable. And so, you know, when COVID hit, and it went online, that was actually when I figured, you know, they're just better off having somebody who's going to give them consistent care. I was doing it for me. I was able to shed some pearls to the fellows, but really, I think the main benefit of me being there was just to kind of talk career paths with the fellows. And I think without that, it wasn't worth it anymore. And I miss seeing patients. But I think, you know, as Dr. Rothenberg said, you make choice about what you like more, and you can like lots of things and you pick. But so there's always the opportunity, but eventually you may have to make a decision.
Yeah, I would echo what you said, Jeremy, and I'd add that if you do want to do clinical medicine, it's much easier to make sure you're in a situation where you're kind of double covered. So if your primary day job pulls you away to travel somewhere or to a meeting or something that you can't miss, you're covered. And that was the beauty of Fellows Clinic for a while. I think it would be a different story to have your own patients with your own Epic inbox and so forth. That might be challenging.
ER doctors might have a different opportunity there. Hospitalists, you know, things with shift work. But yeah, I wasn't going to be checking my labs on a daily basis anymore. And even in academics, it becomes challenging to always have to take part of your day out to do clinic. And I think that's the other thing that Mike was kind of alluding to, is that you know, you're always pulled in one direction such that you're not able to commit to both to anything. So.
Great. Well, we've reached 7 o'clock. Dr. Wong, do we have time for one last question, or should we?
Yeah, we can do one last question and then end it.
Okay. This question actually was submitted before the talk, and someone was wondering regarding a health innovation fellowship. What are the risks and benefits of completing this for academic practice? And I'm not sure if anyone else knows about this, but it sounds like it's a program that several institutions might have. I don't know if the person who asked the question was referring to one in particular, but it's kind of a multidisciplinary kind of data science, technology, public health, and clinical medicine kind of fellowship to kind of find solutions that would benefit healthcare. And I was just curious if any of the panelists knew about this training and had any thoughts on that.
No, but I want to apply. That sounds really cool.
So if no one else has it, I'm not expert in it. I had some friends who did it at Stanford, and I think they you know, it's an opportunity to get yourself exposed to the variety of other opportunities. Honestly, industry's a fairly straightforward track. Public health, you know, has a relatively straightforward track. I think eventually those type of roles will be more straightforward, but as of right now, you know, there's just a lot of different ways they can take you. You can start your own company, you can be in tech, you can be in devices. And so, you know, I had one friend, she worked for Intel and Facebook and a number of other places where tech innovation's happening, and just seeing the variety, I think, is a nice thing if that's something you're interested in. Again, it's not usually drug development. It's somewhere. It's just a range of other opportunities. So if it's something you're interested in, talk to the people, find out who the mentors are, find out where the rotations are, because they could anything you learn can take you down a pathway which will get you somewhere else in the future that's even cooler.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so thanks again to all our panelists for generously offering your time and your experience with us. I hope the webinar has offered some inspiration to everyone else for those interested in exploring a wide array of other career opportunities available to physicians. So thanks again to all for attending.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Have a good
Bianca.
night.
Thank you.
Thanks, Robert.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Have a good night.
Thanks. Good night.